concept is I am these things. My self-esteem is directly related to other people. So I'm better or worse than someone else. So that gets us into social comparison, right? So that's our self-worth derived by comparing yourself to others. So I'm going to compare myself in a social situation and I'm going to say I fall here versus somewhere else. And I'm good at golf because I usually beat other people I'm playing, right? So that has defined my self-worth in a social comparative setting because I usually beat other people I'm playing, which means I must be good because other people are not as good as me. But we use statements of judgment based on the assumption of how well others do the task. So, performance is often the key component of social comparison. And your self-worth is a culmination of many statements. So it's not just one thing. I go play golf one time and I beat somebody, so I say, okay, I'm good at golf. You culminate so many experiences and so many statements and so many beliefs that defines your self-worth. And just as a thought, what are some examples of comparative statements that you might use or think of? And you may want to reflect about some of those comparative statements, especially if you feel that they've really affected your self-worth or self-concept. Your comparative statements are pretty significant when we think about them consistently. So if that's something that has affected you, please feel free to share that. And then when we're talking about self-worth, the importance of the responses is crucial because the messages that we get from others form our self-concept. We've talked about that this whole lecture. So there are really three ways that happens. We either have confirming messages, which people respond to us in ways consistent with our self-concept. So that's almost like what we talked about before. If people say things that we've heard before, then that makes sense and we believe them. So we have confirming messages. Then we have rejecting messages, where people respond to us inconsistently with our own self-appraisal. So I was told, I thought you were really snobby. Well, that wasn't consistent with my self-appraisal. I don't think I'm snobby. So I rejected that message. That was a rejecting message for me because I had to tease apart why is what I believe about myself and what other people believe about me not jiving. And then you have disconfirming messages, not nearly as common, but significant nonetheless, if people don't respond. So we have this interaction and we're waiting for a response for the message and we don't get it. And then we don't really know one way or the other whether or not our self-concept, matches or doesn't match because we really didn't get any indication at all, and that's disconfirming. So, food for thought, what are some of the implications for you? If you're thinking about a confirming message or a rejecting message or a disconfirming message, what does that mean for you? That's probably something you've never really considered. It's not something that we sit up at night and think about, I don't think, but it's interesting to consider that people do respond to us. We talked about the channels and the messages and all those things last week. So we're getting these messages from people, but that then in turn changes our self-concept. So, what does that mean for us? That's pretty important. Okay, so saving face. We've used that term, we've heard that term. What do you think that is? If someone were to say to you, yeah, gosh, I was really just trying to save face. What does that mean? That's certainly an idiomatic expression, meaning very culturally sensitive. So I would argue that's probably a very American concept. I don't know that you could directly translate saving face into another language, and the intent of that phrase would be lost. Like I speak Spanish, and so often the direct translation does not translate well. And so I can guarantee you that, if you translate saving face into Spanish, all of you Spanish speakers, if you did not learn that phrase in America in English, would, look at you and say, what do you mean saving face? And so, that's an idiomatic expression that's sensitive to our culture. So for those of us who are very familiar with American culture and that concept, briefly either write down or consider how you would define that. Someone coming over from Ireland, let's say, and they hear that phrase and they ask you to explain what that means. What might you say? A really easy, safe definition, I suppose, is your face is your person's positive perception of him or herself in interactions with others. So maintaining a good impression in your interaction. That's a very basic definition, and I'm sure you could elaborate on it or change it, depending on the context. But it's, your impression that you're giving off when you interact with another person. But a positive impression, though. If you have a negative impression, you're not saving face. You need to save face if you have a negative perception. So what might be an example? This might be something you want to post about. It can be either a real life example where someone or yourself, had to save face and you want to share that story, or just something that you come up with as a hypothetical example that would illustrate this point well. So, what is an example of saving face? Does it reflect the kind of perception you want others to have of you? So if you feel like you need to save face, obviously the perception that you gave off was not what you intended or desired. And so then you're trying to kind of backpedal and fix it. So can you help others save face, do you think? So if you see somebody really screwing things up and really giving off a negative impression, can you help them in that situation? And if you would argue yes, I'm curious as to how you might help. And then kind of as an addendum, why would you? What would be motivation for helping others save face? So again, something you can post about. I'd be interested to read that because there's a lot of different perceptions on that question. I've gotten lots of responses from other classes, and often people will vehemently argue one side and then someone else will vehemently argue the other. So I think you can, there's no right or wrong, just share with me your thoughts. Can you help someone else save face? How would you do that, and why would you want to? Okay. So we will take a short break if you would like. If not, just please feel free to keep going. There's not a whole lot left. So you may just pause it here or we'll just keep running. So improving self-esteem, there are some easy things that you can do. We've talked about what self-esteem is. We've talked about how it's developed, how it's affected. So how can we improve it? And that's not to say that, if you're going to use these things, you have low self-esteem. Sometimes people with positive self-esteem still do these things to maintain a positive self-esteem. So it's not like these are things to help you overcome a problem, but these are just things that are helpful. Self-talk. So you tell yourself good things about yourself. You can visualize positive images. So I am going to see myself being successful. I'm going to see myself getting an A on this assignment. And a quick story about that. My husband and I were meeting with, there was a new construction site being built, new homes. And we were meeting with the guy selling all of the lots, and we picked our lot and we picked, our model or whatever. And they were selling off all the homes, and so it was pretty exciting, and we were sitting there, and his name was Matt, and he takes us back to his office, and we're sitting in the office while he's filling out paperwork, and there were boats everywhere. On his desk there were the pencil holder was a boat, and his coffee mug had a boat, and he had actual model boats on the shelf, and he had books about boats, and it was just very nautical. And I said, gosh, are you, do you sail, or did you grow up on the water, or, what's the deal with all the boats? And he said, no, but I want to own a boat one day. I want to be successful enough that I can buy myself a nice boat. And I believe that you surround yourself with images of what you want so that you achieve it. And I will never forget that. And he was young. He was probably in his early 20s. And I thought, gosh, that is a guy who is using things to help him believe in himself, to have positive self-esteem, and to achieve his goals. And so I always remember Matt and the boats. And so I think, and yours may not be boats. You may not have any interest at all in boats. But what is a positive image to you? What do you want to achieve? And visualize yourself being successful at it. Don't compare yourself to others. I shared with you, the little adage about you're always going to be better, but always going to be worse. So really there's no point comparing yourself to others. You can reframe. So if you are feeling frustrated or you don't really feel good about yourself in that moment, reframe it. And that's kind of a counseling term, but in other words, I'm feeling like I'm not really doing so well right now, but I'm going to think about something that I am doing well. I may feel like I'm going to bomb this test, and I feel like I haven't studied, and I feel like I haven't, done my time to know the material, but you can say, but I'm going to get a good night's sleep, and I'm going to eat a good breakfast tomorrow, and I'm going to think about the positive things that I can do and have done, and not focus on the negatives. Developing honest relationships is important as well, because people in relationships that are honest with you will help you not just to tell you what you want to hear, but they will help you literally grow into a better person. If people love you and are honest with you, it can help you meet your goals and realize your dreams and become a better person. Let go of the past is important because, we can become victims of the past, and we can dwell on what has happened in the past, and that prevents us from moving forward and, moving in a good direction for ourselves. And if you need to, seek support. You can do that with friends, with family, with therapists, with, whoever you feel like can help you believe in yourself and believe the good things about yourself. There's nothing wrong with saying, if I want to really feel good about myself, I want somebody to help me get there. And that can be your pastor, your priest, your, whoever that may be, but somebody that you can trust to encourage you and build you up and love you until you feel those good things about yourself. Okay, self-talk. Question for you. Why would realistic, positive self-talk have a reassuring effect on your level of self-worth? You can either reflect about that or just think or write it down, but how would that have a reassuring effect on your level of self-worth? And how might it offset the effects of negative self-talk? So if you're telling yourselves good things, that might reassure your level of self-worth. How would you combat the effects of negative self-talk? If you're telling yourself bad things, how can you change that? And do you think self-talk impacts your interpersonal communications, and how? So whether positive or negative, if you're talking to yourself positively, if you're talking to yourself negatively, does that influence your interpersonal communications with others? And if so, how? Again, all things that you can post about if you would like. So avoiding comparing yourself to others. These are just a few that I mentioned before, just a little further in detail. So how do we avoid comparing ourselves to others? Focus on what you have, not on what someone else has that you don't. And, that's easier said than done sometimes, but there are plenty of things in your life that you can be proud of and that you can be thankful for, and that you can say, I am very content and thrilled that this exists in my life. And what someone else may have or may not have is irrelevant when you can claim what you have in your life that's significant for you. And maybe if you can think of an example of a situation and how it was avoided, if it was, in other words, when someone or yourself, even if you're comfortable sharing, you were in a situation and you were wanting to compare yourself to others, and you realized that avoiding that would be more helpful for you, and how that worked out. And do you think we can compare ourselves to others without making judgments? So can we sit and think about ourselves in comparison to someone else neutrally?